Hello, this is just a reminder that I'm doing stand-up comedy in Paris on Friday, the 19th of July, 2024. If you're in the Paris area, why not come along and enjoy the show? Entry is completely free. You can get food there and drinks. It's downstairs. The venue is called Au Soleil de la Butte, 32 Rue Muller in the 18th arrondissement of Paris. Here are the details. 8:30 p.m. I'll be doing 30 minutes of stand-up along with my friend Charles, who's also going to do 30 minutes. And it's going to be fun, okay? And hopefully I'll be doing a live podcast recording in the room afterwards as well, so you could stick around and be part of the audience for that too, okay? Check the link in the description if you would like to reserve a seat. Hello listeners, welcome back to Luke's English Podcast. This is a podcast for learners of English. My name's Luke, I'm your host, English teacher, podcast guy. Hello. So this is a story episode, which means that I'm going to tell you a story and use it to help you learn English. Okay. So listen to the story, see if you can understand it, and then let's see what kind of English you can learn from it as well. Okay. The way this is going to work is that first I'll read the story to you. So you can just try to follow it, try to understand the events and the descriptions. After that, I'll give you a summary of the story in my own words. I'll just basically explain the main details, the main events, the things that happened in my own words, just so that you can kind of check that you understood it, right? I can just help you make sure you've completely understood the story. And then after that, I'll go through every single line of the story and I'll explain loads of the vocabulary that comes up. Okay, so I'll explain loads of details and essentially help to kind of build your vocabulary. I'll help you understand the story like really clearly, but also help you to develop your vocabulary in the process. Okay, there's a PDF for this with all of my slides that I'm using for this with the story text. You can download that PDF free from my website. The link is in the description. On my presentation slides on the PDF, you'll see that a lot of the words and phrases are highlighted in blue. These are the vocab items that I'm going to explain to you in the second half of the episode. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started with the story. So just see if you can follow what happens and what do you think the ending of this story means? What's the meaning of the ending part of this story? As you listen, if you feel confused or if you don't understand something, then just keep listening because I'm going to explain everything afterwards, every detail. All right? So, good. Let's get started. Today's story is called The Simulation. And here we go. As the grey light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Edward Wilson stirred in his bed. His hazel eyes blinked open, and he yawned, stretching his lean frame. The pale sunlight streamed across the perfectly clean sheets of his bed and across his spotless floor. He moved back the curtains, pulled open his window blind, and stood squinting at the silent city below his window. Another day in the sprawling metropolis of London awaited him, or so he thought. Edward was a software engineer, working diligently at a prestigious tech firm in the city. His life was a predictable routine of coding, coffee, and occasional nights out with friends. His days were ordered, tidy, and conveniently empty. He wasn't troubled too much by anxiety or stress, despite his demanding job and the busy pace of life in the city. He had no specific emotional ties or commitments. He was free to live how he wanted, spending his free time exactly as he pleased. However, there'd always been a certain feeling in the back of Edward's mind, a sense that something in his life was not quite right. Something was missing. One brisk autumn morning, as Edward was strolling along the Thames embankment on his way to work, he noticed something unusual. An object hung in the air above the pavement up ahead. Edward walked on for a closer look. A seagull was frozen mid-flight, suspended in the sky like a photograph. Pedestrians around Edward seemed oblivious as they hurried on, engrossed in their conversations or with their faces locked to their phones. Edward reached out to touch the frozen seagull, but it vanished in front of his eyes. Edward snapped his hand back suddenly and stared at the spot where the seagull had been just a few seconds earlier. He glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed. But nobody was watching. The world around him seemed utterly normal. And yet for Edward, things would never be the same again. Slowly, a strange feeling came over him. He felt a shiver run down the length of his spine as he remembered a quote from a famous physicist. "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." Edward spent the day working in his usual focused way. He didn't mention the bizarre frozen seagull to any of his colleagues, but his curiosity was piqued, and that evening he decided to delve deeper. He started by searching online for the quote he'd remembered, which led him down a rabbit hole of philosophy, quantum physics, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. He searched for sightings of similar anomalies, witness accounts, and stories from other people like him. He got lost in that rabbit hole for months, as the world moved around him, normal life passing him by. Every day was the same. The busy world of work and commuting somehow softened by that pale London sunlight. But in the evenings and at night time, he studied. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that his world, his life, was not actually real. It was just some sort of illusion. Every day, the world around him, the people at work, the office spaces and lunchtime cafes, the passers-by in the street, everything became less and less convincing. Edward began to feel trapped, like a prisoner inside a huge trick. One evening, as he stared into the glow of his computer screen, Edward received an unexpected email. The sender's name was Serafina. The message was mysterious and intriguing. "Meet me at Westminster Bridge at midnight," it read. The invitation, the name, the sudden yearning for human connection, it leapt into Edward's heart. He knew it could be a scam, but he just couldn't resist the temptation. He arrived at the bridge at the stroke of midnight, the imposing Big Ben looming out of the shadows above him. The streets were deserted and the moon cast eerie shapes on the ground in the half-light. As he waited, the tower's chimes resonated through the night, and he turned to see a woman emerging from the shadows. Serafina appeared to Edward like an enigma, her features shrouded in darkness. "You're Edward, the one who's been searching for answers," she said. Edward nodded. "Yes, I am." He paused. "And you are?" Call me Serafina. I've been watching you, Edward. I believe you're right about this world. Her eyes met Edward's. She paused. Edward's heart raced. What do you want from me? He said. I need your help, Edward. We need your help, Serafina replied. What are you talking about? Said Edward. Edward, you're not alone. There are others. We're forming a resistance. We want to break free from all this and uncover the truth behind what's really going on. Edward paused. What? Like in the Matrix, he said. Don't mention that, whispered Serafina, glancing away for a moment. She turned back to Edward. Look, just join us, she said. We need someone like you, with your skills. Edward hesitated but found himself drawn to Serafina. For once, things didn't seem so ordered and empty. Wait, said Edward. Just one question. Are you real? Yes, I'm real, said Serafina resolutely. Edward paused. But how can I be sure? He said. Well, Serafina replied, you'll just have to take my word for it, won't you? Now, will you join us, Edward? Edward stood still, his mind turning. He glanced at Serafina again. Okay, I'll help, he said. But how? In her hand, Serafina held a small, unassuming device. This is a disruptor. It can manipulate the fabric of our world, of the simulation. The what? Edward interrupted. What did you call it? Look, there's no time to explain, Edward, but I think you know, don't you? Serafina continued. Edward, you have skills that I don't have, okay? I need you to locate the core, the central computer that controls our world, and disrupt it with this. She held the device out to him. So, are you in? Will you come with me? Edward took one look into Serafina's dark eyes and felt himself hurtling through time. He nodded resolutely. Okay. Together they embarked on a journey that would challenge everything Edward knew about his so-called reality. They visited hidden pockets of the city, places that he'd never noticed before, doorways he'd passed without a second glance, dark corners where walls left gaps into vast undiscovered chambers and corridors, shadows under trees which revealed themselves to be the mouths of unseen tunnels, all leading to the underworld. Here they met others who'd also seen through the reality of the simulation, each with their own stories to tell. Over time, Edward and Serafina grew closer. As Edward's love for Serafina blossomed amidst the chaos of their quest, he felt a growing sense of purpose. It was a love forged in the belief that they were both fighting for the ultimate truth, the chance to live a human life in the real world. But their journey was not without peril. On their way, they encountered those who guarded the simulation and who'd been watching them. Formidable adversaries programmed to maintain the illusion of reality. Fierce battles ensued, sometimes beyond the confines of normal life, blending the lines between digital hallucination and tangible reality. One moonlit night, Edward and Serafina faced their most formidable adversary yet. A towering figure cloaked in shimmering pixels and black light, barring their way. Edward activated the disruptor. The world around them trembled, and the Guardian faltered. Seraphina seized the moment and struck a decisive blow, shattering the Guardian's code into fragments. With the Guardian defeated, they pressed on, beyond the city limits, following a faint signal emanating from the disruptor in Edward's hands. It led them deep into the industrial wastelands on the far outskirts of the city to a seemingly ordinary building. Inside, they found an unassuming room with one single computer terminal. A single cursor blinked on the screen. Edward approached the terminal, his hands trembling with anticipation. As he connected the disruptor, the room seemed to ripple, revealing its true nature. It was a control center, the hub of the simulation. The screen displayed a message. "Welcome, Edward Wilson. You have come far, but do you really want to know the truth?" Edward hesitated, his mind racing with doubts and fears. He glanced at Seraphina, who nodded encouragingly. With determination, he typed a single word: yes. Instantly, the simulation began to unravel. The cityscape dissolved into streams of code, and Edward and Seraphina found themselves standing in a vast, featureless void. Edward looked at Seraphina. "That was too easy," he said. Suddenly the sound of a voice echoed around them, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Congratulations, Edward Wilson. You have chosen the path of truth. But remember, reality is a complex tapestry, and the threads of your existence are intertwined with the lives of countless others. Life in reality is neither simple nor easy. You must always choose, and choose wisely for yourself and for others." "What's he talking about?" said Edward, turning to Seraphina. But all of a sudden, Seraphina seemed to slip away from him. In the next few moments, Edward felt a profound sense of disorientation as his memories and experiences shifted and merged with the things around him. He saw glimpses of different lives, different choices, all part of the intricate tapestry of the simulation. He saw himself and Seraphina living different separate lives, never meeting, never knowing each other. Panicking, Edward shouted for it to stop. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the void collapsed, and Edward and Seraphina finally found themselves back in the real world, or so it seemed. They stood on a hill overlooking the city, bathed in the warm light of dawn. The cityscape was familiar, yet subtly different. Seraphina turned to Edward, a knowing smile on her lips. "Welcome to the real world, Edward," she said. "We made it." Edward gazed at the transformed city, a sense of awe and wonder filling his heart. The love he felt for Seraphina was real, and the truth that they'd uncovered was the most exhilarating adventure of his life. As they embraced, the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden rays upon a world that was now truly their own. "You see?" said Seraphina. "See what?" said Edward. "I am real," she said. A smile arrived on Edward's face, and as Seraphina smiled too, he kissed her lips, and she kissed him back. And that was when the explosions began. All right, there you go, that's the end of the story. What did you think of that then? A sort of, what is that? A kind of a science fiction romance adventure kind of thing? Right, so at this point, I need to just explain the basic events, right? I just need to summarize the story just to help you make sure that you've understood it, right? So, okay, so it's about this guy called Edward Wilson. Edward Wilson lives in London. He is single. He has a pretty good life as far as we can tell. He lives in what appears to be a nice apartment with a view that looks over the city of London. He's got this wonderful view, and that's very difficult to get. So he must be doing okay in his life if he's got a nice apartment with a view like that. He works in a prestigious tech firm, so he works for some sort of famous tech company. Maybe he's a software engineer or something like that. But he's got a good job for a good company, probably some kind of software engineering role of some kind. And his life is very organised, it's very ordered, it's very tidy. He doesn't really have a lot going on in terms of emotional commitments. He doesn't, as I said, he's single. There's no family really mentioned in the story. He doesn't seem to have any specific commitments. In fact, he's very kind of free in his life, but at the same time, his life is quite empty as well, right? There isn't really much love or passion in there. It's just kind of work and then a very ordered, tidy, single life. Okay, but he's always had this weird feeling that there's something not quite right about the world. There's always been a nagging feeling. Then one day he's walking to work and he sees something really strange. He sees a bird sort of stuck in the air, as if it's a kind of a photograph of a bird, but it's just stuck, like a kind of glitch or something, right? Like in a computer game, you see these things, like a kind of a glitch, like something's gone wrong in the game. In this case, it was a bird, a seagull, just sort of hanging in the air. And no one else seemed to have noticed it, but maybe that's just because all the other people in the street or people walking to work as well were just too busy talking to each other or looking at their phones. Edward seemed to be the only one who noticed this strange thing. He went to actually touch the bird, and when he did that, it just completely disappeared. And he was really shocked by this, and it gave him a very strange feeling. And he suddenly remembered a quote, a famous quote from a scientist, I think it's Einstein, who said, "Reality is merely an illusion." Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a persistent one, but reality is an illusion, is what Einstein said. So he remembered this quote, and it sort of got stuck in his head. Even when he was at work, he would work normally in his job, but then in the evenings and at night, he spent all his time researching this idea and getting lost in a kind of slightly obsessive way about the idea that reality was not what it seemed, that reality was an illusion. And he started researching quantum physics and philosophy and, these sorts of things, trying to find out more about this idea that we live in some sort of illusion. And he started to be convinced that life as he knew it was not real, that it was like an illusion, or something was sort of fake or not genuine about the world that he was living in. Okay? And then he got an email from someone called Serafina asking to meet him at Westminster Bridge at midnight. And so he'd been contacted by this girl called Serafina. He goes to meet her. She's kind of mysterious. He's attracted to her. He's attracted to the sort of danger, the mystery, the intrigue, the excitement. And also, of course, the fact that she is saying, "Look, Edward, I know that you've discovered that the world you're living in is not real, I feel the same, and there are other people also who've kind of woken up to this situation, and we need your help because you've got your computer skills. We need your help to break us out of this simulation." And he's like, "What? She said, yeah, simulation. So she's saying that they live in a constructed computer simulation. And yeah, it sounds familiar, right? The story sounds familiar. Sounds a bit like The Matrix, doesn't it? In fact, Edward at one point goes, what, you mean like The Matrix? And Serafina's like, shh, don't talk about that. This isn't The Matrix, this is a different story, so don't mention The Matrix. Oh, okay. And then at this point in the story, basically Edward joins Serafina. He leaves his other life behind, and they go out and just kind of explore the world, and they're on a mission to try to find the core of the simulation, to find out where this simulation is being generated from. And they encounter enemies, sort of like I don't know what they are, like artificial enemies generated by the simulation, which are there to stop them, to protect the simulation, but they have to fight against them, and they defeat them, and eventually they find their way to this warehouse on the outskirts of town. And Edward and Serafina have this thing called a disruptor. I'm not sure what that is. It's one of those convenient bits of technology that you get in films. And Edward activates the disruptor, and it kind of seems to disrupt the simulation, revealing the truth, revealing reality. It reveals this computer terminal, which conveniently offers Edward the question, do you want to know the truth? And Edward, even though he's brilliant at coding and he knows about computers, all he has to do is just write, yes. Do you want to know the truth? YES, enter. And the simulation sort of seems to unravel. The simulation dissolves around him and Serafina, and they're left in a kind of blank space. They hear this voice, maybe the voice of I don't know what it is. It would be the voice of the AI that controls the simulation, or it could be the voice of the person who's created it, some sort of creator or some sort of disembodied voice. Says to Edward something like, so you want to know the truth, okay. What is it he says? Something kind of vaguely impressive sounding, something kind of mysterious. Congratulations, Edward, you've chosen the path of truth. But remember, reality is a complex tapestry, and the threads of your existence are intertwined with the lives of countless others. So basically this voice says, okay, well done, you've discovered the truth, but you have to realize in the real world, it's very complicated, and your life is all mixed up with the lives of other people. Your life is connected to the lives of everybody else. So you have to make choices. You have to accept your own free will and the consequences of that. Right? So, it seems to be a slightly philosophical statement about the idea of free will, that with a sense of free will, there's also a certain amount of responsibility, because the things you do will affect the people around you and blah, blah, blah. You can't continue to just live on your own in your own little disconnected world. It's actually arguably more complicated, more difficult to live in the real world. But then eventually it seems that Edward slips out of the simulation. He feels disorientated. He's worried that he's going to lose Serafina. He sees all these glimpses of other alternative realities or something. And then finally he lands back in the real world, or what appears to be the real world, standing on a hill with Serafina. The city is in front of them, and the city has changed. It's sort of slightly different. Apparently this is the real world that they're now standing in, and they turn to each other and they say, hey, wow, we did it, fantastic. And Serafina goes, look, you see, I am real after all. And then they kiss, and it's romantic. But then the last line of the story says, so as they kiss, apparently in the real world, the last line of the story is, and that was when the explosions began. Right? Which is supposed to be a sort of mysterious ending. What does this mean at the end? What do you think? What does that last line of the story mean? And that was when the explosions began. Could it be the explosions of passion, the explosions of love in Edward and Serafina's hearts as they kiss? Is it that? Or are these real explosions? Are there actually explosions going off in the city, In which case, why is this? Why are there explosions happening in the city? Is this what life is like in the real world? Is it a dangerous place where, okay, this is the real world, we're not in some sort of artificial simulation anymore, but maybe there's conflict, maybe there's war, maybe this is the reality of the real world. Or maybe this is whoever was responsible for maintaining the simulation is now coming to try to attack Edward and Serafina as some sort of response to them escaping the simulation or destroying the simulation. Maybe this is the robots or something coming to get them. I don't know. I thought that I would leave that open at the end, but you can let us know what you think. All right. So, what did you think of the story, everybody? You might be thinking, who wrote that story, Luke? You didn't say the name of the author. Well, actually, this story, I kind of wrote this myself, but I didn't write it myself. So this actually initially was an AI-generated story, which I thought was quite ironic that I asked AI to write a story about how we might be living in an AI-generated simulation. So ChatGPT wrote the original story, but I have spent quite a lot of time adapting it and changing it, trying to improve it, essentially, trying to add that human element. Okay, because the first version of the story was fine, but like with a lot of AI-generated content, it lacked a certain human touch to it. I don't know, I tried to improve it. I'll let you speculate about which parts are the original AI versions and which parts are mine. Needless to say, or I'm going to say it anyway, the story, the finished version is longer than the original version. So I added quite a lot and adapted quite a lot to try to bring a slightly more emotional tone or a slightly more mysterious tone to the story as a whole. Okay, so let's now move on to the vocab explanations. And this is where I'm going to go through every single line of that story again and explain a lot of the language, lots of the vocabulary, words and phrases and things which in my slides are highlighted in blue. Okay, so ready to expand your vocab? Now there's going to be quite a lot of vocabulary here. Okay, it might be a little bit overwhelming, but you can see my notes that I'm using here. I'll put all of those notes with little examples and other definitions and things. I'll put those on the page for this episode on my website. Just check the link in the description. You can go back, you can visit those things again. Okay. All right, so let's get started. All right, are you ready? Here we go. So, as the grey light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Edward Wilson stirred in his bed. So, the grey light of dawn, dawn is when the sun rises. So, this is the first light of the day. That's dawn. So, you have dawn in the morning, and in the evening, when the sun goes down, what's that called? That's called dusk. So, dawn and dusk. In this case, it's dawn. The grey light of dawn. As the grey light of dawn filtered through the curtains. So basically the sunlight comes through the windows and through the curtains. The curtains act like a filter. Okay, so I suppose this describes the way the sunlight comes through with a certain sort of quality to it. The sunlight has been filtered, so it's slightly less bright. It might describe a certain texture or a certain look of the light in Edward's bedroom in the morning, right? But filtered through. Other examples of that, you could say like the water. This water has been filtered through layers of rock and sand, like mineral water. You know, mineral water is filtered through layers of rock, so that ultimately it's very pure. Air can be filtered through a purifier to clean the air, right? But it's not just air and water. It could be other things, like, for example, Van Gogh's paintings. Here's an example describing something more abstract rather than literally filtering water or air or light. In Van Gogh's paintings, that's the Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh. I pronounce it Van Gogh. There's lots of different pronunciations of his name, but that's how he's generally pronounced in the UK, in British English. In Van Gogh's paintings, his world is filtered through his unique perception of the world, resulting in a unique style, right? So Van Gogh, in Van Gogh's paintings, the world is filtered through his perceptions, resulting in this unique style. Okay? All right, so the light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Edward Wilson stirred in his bed. So he stirred, doesn't mean he was stirring, like literally stirring a cup of coffee, stirring sugar into his coffee, although that is one of the meanings of the verb to stir, meaning to mix a drink, like for example to stir your tea or stir your coffee in the morning. That's not what's happening here. He's not sitting there stirring his tea. No, but in this case, Edward Wilson stirred in his bed. This means he moved slightly. So to stir can also mean just move a little bit, like for example a person waking up. Just like little movements, maybe the arm or legs move slightly as someone starts to wake up in the morning. So to stir. You could also say this of an animal. Okay. When did I give an example of going into a cave and there was a bear in the cave and you realise, oh my God, what's this? Something is stirring at the back of the cave. Oh my God, it's a huge bear. I can't remember when I gave an example of that, but I did before. I must have explained the word stir in a previous episode. Anyway, moving on. His hazel eyes blinked open and he yawned, stretching his lean frame. His hazel eyes. So hazel describes an eye colour, right? It's just one of the eye colours, right? So most common eye colours are obviously brown and blue. You can have green and grey as well, but hazel is an eye colour that's basically a sort of a mix of brown and green with maybe bits of gold or bits of amber in there. That's hazel, a kind of brownish green colour. So I've got hazel eyes, okay, sort of greenish brownish colour, very common eye colour. So anyway, Edward's hazel eyes, brownish greenish colour, blinked open, so that means his eyes opened and closed a couple of times, and he yawned. That's yawn. He yawned, stretching his lean frame. So his frame, this means his body, right? Especially with reference to when you describe someone's body as, when you use the word frame, you're normally referring to someone's body shape or size. In this case, his lean frame. So lean means kind of thin but healthy, okay? Because sometimes thin on its own can mean unhealthy, but lean is thin but healthy, sort of without a lot of fat on his body. So his lean frame, he's kind of slim, fairly muscular. Okay. Moving on. The pale sunlight streamed across the perfectly clean sheets of his bed. So the sunlight streamed across. To stream, this is when air or light or liquid or gas flows continuously. Okay, a sort of a continuous flow of liquid or air or gas or in this case light. So it streamed across. You can imagine sort of lines or beams of light coming through the window, across the perfectly clean sheets of his bed and across his spotless floor. So his sheets are perfectly clean. His floor is spotless. Spotless, perfectly clean mean the same thing. Okay. So it's, quite a nice atmospheric description of the light shining into his bedroom, and all the surfaces are all clean and perfect. He moved back the curtains, pulled open his window blind, and stood squinting at the silent city below his window. Apparently Edward has both curtains and a window blind. But I think you know what curtains are. You just open and close the curtains. Close the curtains at night, open the curtains in the morning. Shh, right? A window blind is another thing that would cover the window. There are a few different types of window blind. Here are some of the most common types of window blind. You've got roller blinds, which roll up into a kind of a roll, right? And you roll them up and then you roll them down. There's Venetian blinds, which are in kind of slats, right? Those are those long, sort of long pieces, wood, maybe metal, and you can arrange the slats so that they're open or closed, and you can pull them all up as well. You can open them and close them and sort of move the slats. So that's Venetian blinds. There's Roman blinds. Those are those ones that are made of fabric and you pull a string and they kind of fold as they go up. Those are Roman blinds. And also electric blinds as well, which, you press a button and ding, the blind goes up or down. Then also you've got shutters. Shutters go on the outside of windows, normally made of wood. And for example, if you're going away on holiday or if there's going to be a storm or something, you would close the shutters and sort of lock them, and it completely closes off the windows. Most homes in the UK don't have shutters. In France, where I live, it's very common for houses to have shutters on the windows, on the outsides of the windows. Okay. And so he pulled open his window blind and stood squinting at the silent city below his window. So to squint is to kind of look out, look at something normally that's quite bright. So look into bright light, and you kind of close your eyes slightly so that the brightness doesn't go into your eyes too much. So it's sort of like to look with your eyes partially closed because you're trying to block out the light so you don't get blinded, right? Like me, when I'm doing a walk and talk episode outside, when I point the camera at me, you can see that I'm squinting because I'm trying to, block out some of the sunlight, or like Clint Eastwood in a Clint Eastwood film, he's always squinting. Okay. Another day in the sprawling metropolis of London awaited him, or so he thought. A sprawling metropolis. So a metropolis is basically a very large city, okay, a huge city that spreads out over a wide distance. Sprawling, in this case a sprawling metropolis, sprawling means that it spreads out far and wide in a sort of haphazard fashion, or in a sort of disorganized fashion. Right, the way large cities do this, right? They spread out in all directions and it's all fairly disorganized. It's just like a sort of weird process, the way that cities spread out, right? It's kind of, if you stand on the top floor of a large building in the center of a big city, a metropolis, like London or Tokyo or something, and you look out, you can just see the city spreading out in no particular order, but just spreading far and wide in a sort of disorganized way. So that's that adjective. The adjective to describe that is sprawling. The sprawling city, a sprawling forest, a sprawling desert, a sprawling story, like a large story that goes on and on, like the sort of the Lord of the Rings is quite a sprawling story, a sprawling epic. The story goes off it's very long and there are many aspects to it. A sprawling universe, right? Anything that spreads out large and wide. So another day in the sprawling metropolis of London awaited him. Awaited him, this just means waited for him. So another day waited for him, another day awaited him. What's the difference between waited for him and awaited him? Well, awaited is just slightly more formal, slightly more literary style. And sometimes more formal language is used in literature, in story writing, because it just creates a slightly more serious tone. Otherwise, it sounds a bit too conversational. For example, another day in the sprawling metropolis of London waited for him sounds a bit more conversational, but another day awaited him. This sounds a bit more impressive for a piece of literature, even a small piece of literature like this, a short piece of literature. Okay. Edward was a software engineer working diligently at a prestigious tech firm. So to work diligently, or to be diligent, do something diligently, this means to work hard with a lot of care and attention. To be diligent, to work diligently. Diligent always refers to work of some kind, and it means doing it in a careful and attentive way. Attentive to details, being careful, working hard, working seriously. Okay, so he worked diligently at a prestigious tech firm. Prestigious means it's well known, it's very respected, it's got very high status. If you tell people that you work for this company, they go, "Ooh, wow, very impressive." So it's a top high-level company with a high reputation. A tech firm, I guess you probably know this, right? A tech firm means a technology firm. Firm meaning company. A firm is just a type of company. So we say like a law firm, a tech firm, an investment firm. In this case, a prestigious tech firm. His life was a predictable routine of coding, coffee, and occasional nights out with friends. So it was predictable, means that his routine, that meaning the things that he did every day, the things he always did, like getting up, having a shower, having breakfast, getting dressed, commuting to work, working on his projects, coming home, right? This is his routine. It was predictable. Predictable means you can predict what's going to happen. You always know what's going to happen because it's always the same. So it's easy to predict. And the suggestion is that this is also somewhat boring and not very exciting. It was a predictable routine, kind of safe, a little boring, of coding, so writing computer code, coffee, and occasional nights out with friends. Occasional meaning it happened occasionally, right? Sometimes. All right, moving on. His days were ordered, tidy, and conveniently empty. So ordered just means that everything in his life was arranged in a certain way. Things were put in a clear structure, clearly arranged. There was no mess. Everything was neat and tidy. Okay. Ordered and organised. What's the difference? They're very similar words, but ordered suggests that things are neat and tidy as well. Everything is in its right place. Everything's neat and tidy, no mess. Okay? All right. Conveniently empty. His days were conveniently empty. Empty, obviously meaning that there was nothing in them, nothing going on really. I mean, no sort of like, what's the word for it? No love life, so to speak. No love life to speak of. No serious commitments. So in that sense, sort of emotionally quite empty. Conveniently empty. So this emptiness was quite convenient for him because it made life quite simple and easy. He wasn't troubled too much by anxiety or stress. He wasn't troubled by it. He wasn't bothered by it. He wasn't inconvenienced by it, although inconvenienced is a little bit less strong than troubled, meaning anxiety or stress didn't cause him any trouble. He had no trouble with these things. So he wasn't troubled by anxiety or stress, despite his demanding job, right? So a demanding job is a job that demands a lot from you. It requires a lot from you. It requires a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of commitment, a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of mental load. So that's a demanding job. It's sort of tough. You feel tired afterwards, right? That's a demanding job. His job was demanding, but he wasn't really troubled too much by anxiety or stress. He also wasn't troubled too much by the busy pace of life in the city. The pace of life, this means the speed of life. So when we use the word pace, we basically mean speed. So at a fast pace, the fast-paced life in the city, or the busy pace of life, this means the speed of life in the city. And as you may know, if you live in a big city, the pace of life can be very fast. It can be quite stressful, can be quite exhausting. But Edward wasn't really troubled by these things. He had no specific emotional ties or commitments. Ties, these are essentially commitments. It's the same thing. Ties are things that attach you to something, things that limit your freedom in some way because you're attached to them, like attachments, things that tie you down. For example, a girlfriend or a wife or children, right? So ties, commitments, these are synonyms. It's quite common to have, in English, to have two synonymous words used in the same sentence, especially together. No emotional ties or commitments, right? For example, willing and able, or willing and able, or null and void, or ties or commitments. It's not uncommon to have two synonymous words used right next to each other with and or in the middle. Next we've got, he was free to live how he wanted, spending his free time exactly as he pleased. Okay. However, there had always been a certain feeling in the back of Edward's mind. So in the back of your mind, this expression, in the back of your mind. If something is in the back of your mind, it means it's there in your mind, but it's not dominating your thoughts. Okay, it's not something you're thinking about directly all the time. It's just maybe a thought or feeling that's there, but you don't think about it directly or clearly. They're just in the background, and as a result they might give you a certain general feeling in your life. They might influence, these thoughts in the back of your mind might influence the way you think or behave. For Edward, although life seems to be ordered and fine, something is still not quite right, because there's this feeling in the back of his mind which is kind of suggesting to him that something's not quite right here, even though everything seems so organised and tidy. Something was missing. One brisk autumn morning, so brisk means bright, energetic, lively, fresh. I suppose that Edward is walking to work. He's walking along the Thames embankment, which is the sort of pedestrian area next to the River Thames. Okay, so he's walking along there. A brisk autumn morning. This suggests that, yeah, it's bright, it's lively, it's fresh. So maybe the temperature in the air might be a little bit cold, which is kind of refreshing, and the exercise of the walk is quite energizing. So that's brisk. A brisk walk in the countryside, a brisk wind, maybe like a cold wind that's sort of energizing. A brisk morning, a brisk walk. One brisk autumn morning, as Edward was strolling along the Thames, As Edward was strolling along the Thames embankment. Strolling, this is just another way to describe walking. If strolling means walking in a fairly relaxed way, because remember, Edward is not the sort of person to be very stressed by things, so he was strolling along the Thames, walking in a fairly relaxed way. Then he noticed something. An object hung in the air. Hung, so that's hang, hung, right? Hang. To hang means to be suspended in the air, just hanging in the air, just suspended in the air. Normally, if something hangs because there's like a hook or a piece of string that you use to hang it up, like for example, you take off your coat when you come home, you put it on a coat hanger and you hang up your coat, and then your coat hangs in the cupboard. Right, hanging from a hook. But in this case, this seagull just hung in the air above the pavement up ahead. You could equally say an object was hanging in the air. You could say that too. Above the pavement up ahead. It was suspended in the air. The pavement, do you know what this is? This is basically the path where you walk. In the UK, we call it the pavement. In the USA, they call it the sidewalk. Okay, the pedestrian area on the side of the road. So an object hung in the air, or was hanging in the air above the pavement, above the sidewalk up ahead. Edward walked on for a closer look. He walked on, meaning he continued walking. So you may have noticed that sometimes we add on after a verb to make phrasal verbs like this, and it suggests the idea of continuing to do it, right? So in this case, walk on. He walked on, meaning he kept walking. He continued walking. With other similar phrases could be to move on, right? Let's move on, meaning let's continue forwards. Let's drive on, meaning continue driving. Okay, so for example, you slow down to look at an accident, but then you drive on, meaning continue to drive. Carry on, let's not stop, let's carry on. To talk on, meaning to continue talking. He talked on and on for hours in his podcast. To read on, meaning keep reading. To ramble on, like I do in my episodes, just to keep rambling. And dream on, keep dreaming. Okay? Yeah. Okay then, let's move on. There's one. See, I just used one, didn't I? A seagull was frozen mid-flight. A seagull is a type of bird. Okay? Seagull, technically it's just a gull, although people call them seagulls. Although technically they're just called gulls. They're often called seagulls because they often do live near the sea. But sometimes seagulls live inland too, often near water. So seagulls or gulls are these normally white birds with a yellow beak, maybe grey or black wings. You often see them at the seaside, at the beach. You know the ones? They're often in large numbers. They kind of go grr, 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 like that. If you go to the seaside in England and you've got fish and chips in a paper bag and you're having a nice fish and chips on the seafront, be careful because sometimes the seagulls come down and steal your chips. Yeah. So anyway, Edward saw a seagull frozen in the sky mid-flight. Mid-flight meaning in the middle of flying. This is an adverb to modify the adjective frozen. It was frozen. How was it frozen? Frozen mid-flight, sort of in the middle of flying. Pedestrians around Edward seemed oblivious. Pedestrians, these are just people walking. That's what we call people who are walking along. They're pedestrians. They seemed oblivious. Oblivious meaning they had no idea that it was happening. If you're oblivious to something, it means you've got no idea that it's happening. In this case, the pedestrians were walking along completely unaware that there was this weird kind of glitch going on. They were unaware, they were oblivious as they hurried on. To hurry on is to move on, right? Keep going, but in a hurry. If you're in a hurry, it means you're in a rush. You're trying to be quick, got to get to work, hurry up. Right, so they were oblivious as they hurried on, meaning continued hurrying. Engrossed in their conversations. If you're engrossed in something, it means you're completely involved in it, completely focused on it, and you're not aware of other things. For example, you could be engrossed in a really good book. Right, I missed my stop. I missed my station because I was engrossed in this book. I was engrossed in an episode of Luke's English podcast and I missed my turning off the motorway or something like that, which has happened. I got an email once from a listener who said that they drove something like 40 miles too far because they missed several turnings off the highway because they were so engrossed in the episode of Luke's English podcast that they were listening to. Please take care while you're driving or other things. If you're operating heavy machinery, please take care while listening to this podcast. Anyway, so the pedestrians were engrossed in their conversations. They just didn't notice because they were too deeply involved in what they were doing. Edward reached out to touch the frozen seagull. So he reached means he sort of stretched his arm to touch the bird. He reached out. Adding out to that emphasizes that he has to reach his arm quite a long way. Okay, he has to kind of reach quite far. So he didn't just reach to touch the seagull, he reached out to touch it. More or less the same meaning. Reach and reach out, more or less the same thing. But reach out suggests that you've got to make a bit more of an effort. Edward snapped his hand back. So snapped his hand back. He moved his hand back very quickly. So snap refers to a very fast, sudden movement, right? Like, for example, a crocodile. Pam! A crocodile would snap its jaws, snap its mouth closed. Snap also refers to a sound as well. right? The sound that is made when you break something. For example, if you snap your pencil, snap. If you step on a piece of wood and it snaps, it breaks, right? But in all of those cases, we're talking about a quick, sudden movement. Edward snapped his hand back. He moved his hand back very quickly because he was kind of so surprised. He glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed. So he's kind of like looking around quickly, looking left, looking right, looking forwards, looking back, just to see if anyone else has noticed what's happened. So to glance means to look quickly. Glance around is to look all around you quickly. But nobody was watching. The world around him seemed utterly normal. So utterly means completely, right? So we could say completely normal. They are synonyms, utterly and completely. But utterly is quite nice because it expresses a slightly more extreme feeling, right? It's a bit more emphatic than saying completely. Completely is already fairly emphatic, but utterly has a bit more emphasis to it. For example, what did you think of that film? I thought it was boring, right? Or I thought it was really boring, or I thought it was utterly mind-numbing. That was utterly disgusting. That film was utterly ridiculous. It's got quite a nice sort of punch to it, that word, utterly. That's utterly ridiculous. Sounds quite good. And yet for Edward, things would never be the same again. Slowly a strange feeling came over him. A feeling comes over you, meaning that the feeling gradually arrives. You gradually start to feel something. For example, a feeling of tiredness came over me. A sense of nervousness came over me. As I walked into the doctor's waiting room, a feeling of nervousness came over me. Right? Or as I opened the present, a feeling of excitement came over me. In this case, a strange feeling came over Edward. He felt a shiver run down the length of his spine. So a shiver is like that cold feeling that makes you kind of makes you feel uncomfortable when your body shakes, probably because it's cold or you're afraid. So that's a shiver. It could be a noun, it could be a verb, to shiver. Like if you're really cold, if you've been outside in the rain and you're freezing cold, you shiver, right? Similarly, if you're scared, you'd shiver. In this case, he felt a shiver run down the length of his spine. So down the length of his spine. Spine is the central part of your skeleton going down your back, right? All the bones in your back going from your head all the way down to the bottom of your back, right? Down to your hips, your waist, right? This is your spine. He felt a shiver run down the length of his spine. So he felt this disturbing feeling as he remembered a quote from a famous physicist. The quote was from Einstein: "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." So merely an illusion, merely means only just an illusion, no more than an illusion. We use this word merely to say that something is not that important. Yeah, it's only an illusion, right? For other examples, he's not important. He's merely an English language podcaster. He doesn't pose a threat to us, said the governments of the world. What about, you can imagine some government department that sort of like monitors internet activity. Sir, we've noticed an alarming amount of interest among our people in this podcast. Sounds interesting. What is the name of the podcast? It is called Luke's English Podcast. Oh yes, Luke's English Podcast. Yes, my children and my wife listen to that, and we listen to it in the car sometimes. Do you think, sir, that he poses a threat of any kind? A threat? No, he's merely an English language teacher. He poses no threat to us. Meanwhile, Luke's English Podcast is actually blocked in at least one country in the world. Why? Not sure. Anyway, merely an illusion. He's merely an English language teacher. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Albeit, interesting word. It's like but, it's like although, it's one of those words, like even though. You could replace the word albeit with the word but, which is one of the most versatile linking words that we have. So you could just say but. Reality is just an illusion, but a persistent one. So you could say but. Albeit, though, is followed by a noun or an adjective or an adverbial phrase. It's not followed by a clause, which means a verb, which means a subject and a verb. Does that make sense? So we would say reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. But we wouldn't say albeit it is a very persistent one. No. Although works like that. Reality is merely an illusion, although it is a very persistent one, yes. But albeit does not work like that. So it can't be followed by subject-verb. It's followed by, in this case, a noun phrase, a very persistent one. Okay. Okay, so other examples. Reality, the music was great. The music was great, although it was a little loud for my tastes. So could you repeat that, but with the word albeit instead? The music was great, although it was a little bit loud. The music was great, albeit a little bit loud. Now, to be honest, you probably wouldn't use albeit in just everyday regular conversation. Again, it's another one of these slightly more sophisticated literary style words, I would say. So, reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. If something's persistent, it just persists. It manages to stay there all the time. It's difficult to kind of make it stop. Okay, so reality is an illusion. Apparently, according to Einstein, reality is an illusion, but it's an illusion that just continues to go. It carries on. It never falters or stops. Okay. What do you think, listeners? Is reality an illusion? If it is an illusion, how? In what way is reality an illusion? And what about this idea that we're living in a simulation? I might mention that again later on in this episode, but we've got to keep moving on, haven't we? There's a lot more to get through here in terms of vocabulary. How are you doing, though? You doing all right out there? Good. You're managing to stay focused? A lot of vocab here, but let's keep going. All right, so Edward spent the day working in his usual focused way. He didn't mention the bizarre frozen seagull to any of his colleagues, but his curiosity was piqued, and that evening he decided to delve deeper. So to pique, it works normally, this verb normally works with fixed expressions. To pique your interest, to pique your curiosity. And it's quite often passive. My interest was piqued, my curiosity was piqued. It just means to grab your interest, to grab your curiosity, to stimulate your interest, stimulate your curiosity. It kind of like spikes your curiosity and sort of makes it work, makes it active. All right, to stimulate. Right, to pique, it piqued my curiosity. And that's pique, spelt P-I-Q-U-E, D in this case, the past participle. So that's P-I-Q-U-E, that's peak. It's not peak, P-E-A-K, which is the high point of a mountain, the peak of a mountain. And it's not peak, P-E-E-K, which is a quick look. I peeked over the top of the wall and had a quick look. No, it's peak, P-I-Q-U-E. All right, does that make it easier, or are you more confused now? I don't know. But to reach a peak, to reach the peak of the mountain, P-E-A-K, a quick peek, a sneak peek over the wall, P-E-E-K, and to pique your interest, P-I-Q-U-E. Anyway, Edward's curiosity was piqued, and that evening he decided to delve deeper. So to delve into something is to look deeply into something, look inside something deeply. In this case, into a certain subject. Okay, to delve deeper means to delve even further. So he's the frozen seagull caught his attention, and this has stimulated his curiosity, and he's decided to investigate further, to delve deeper. He started by searching online for the quote he'd remembered, which led him down a rabbit hole of philosophy, quantum physics, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. A rabbit hole refers to, how do I describe this? Going down a rabbit hole means getting very interested in a very specific subject and reading about it, researching it, and kind of getting lost in the subject. It comes from Alice in Wonderland, that story. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice follows a white rabbit that runs down a rabbit hole. She goes down a rabbit hole. She gets lost in another world. So that's the origin of the expression. But if you go down a rabbit hole, it's like, for example, if someone says to you, you know what, the world is actually a simulation, and you're like, what, really? Yeah, Google it. And then you Google it and you read all these articles, and then you kind of you find out more and more, and you get completely obsessed with it, and you're not thinking about other things. You're just completely obsessed and focused on this subject. You're deep in a rabbit hole. Okay. In this case, Edward goes down a rabbit hole of philosophy and physics related to virtual reality and quantum science and stuff in order to investigate what he's seen. He searched for sightings. A sighting is when someone sees something. For example, UFO sightings, right? Sightings of strange things in the sky. Ghost sightings. That's where people report having seen a ghost. Or similar anomalies. An anomaly is something which is not normal, something that's out of the ordinary, something that is not expected, right? Something that seems to stick out and that is completely different from the normal run of things. For example, this seagull frozen in the air, this is a complete anomaly. It's a completely abnormal thing. He got lost in that rabbit hole for months as the world moved around him, normal life passing him by. So to pass you by means to go past without stopping. Okay, for example, I stood on the side of the road and watched a parade of musicians passing me by, coming past me, right? Another example would be like focusing. I've focused on my studies so much, and as a result, I haven't lived a full life. I've just been focusing on my university studies, and so many opportunities have passed me by because I've been completely obsessed with learning to be an English language teacher. Every day was the same. The busy world of work and commuting. Commuting means travelling from home to work. When you live in a different place to where you work, you often have to travel into the city, for example. That's commuting. To commute is the verb. A commute is a journey from home to work or work to home, right? A busy commute, a long commute. A commuter is a person who commutes, and a commuter train would be a train full of people commuting. Lots of commuter trains go in and out of London every morning and evening. So every day, the world around him, the people at work, blah, 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 the passers-by in the street, everything became less and less convincing. Passers-by, these are people, a passerby, that's one word, Passerby, one single word. A passerby is a person who passes you by, a person who walks past you, probably in the street. Okay, the plural of that is passers-by, not passerbys. Okay, so it's one passerby, two passers-by. If you're writing it, passers-by could be hyphenated, passers-by. So you could hyphenate it or not. It's up to you. Okay. All right. So people who walked past him, everything, all of these things became less convincing. He began to feel like he was trapped. He decided that everything was an illusion. One evening he stared into the glow of his computer screen. A glow is light which comes out right? The glow of a fire, the glow of a screen, the glow of the city lights. So just light coming out. That's a glow, not a bright light, kind of like a soft light that comes out, like the light that comes from your mobile phone in the evening, or the light which comes off the city at night. He got an email. The message was mysterious and intriguing. Intriguing means very interesting because it's unusual or mysterious. In this case, an intriguing message. But you could say other things like an intriguing question. That's a very intriguing question. That's a very intriguing idea. Very intriguing fact. She has a very intriguing personality. The invitation, the name, the sudden yearning for human connection, right? To yearn for something is to have an intense feeling of desire or longing, like you really need something, you really want something, especially if you can't have it. This is yearning, or yearning for something. It often has romantic and emotional connotations. For example, a yearning for human connection, a yearning for love, to yearn for solitude. You know, maybe you yearn for solitude, meaning you'd love to spend time on your own. Maybe if your life is very crowded and busy, you might yearn to travel the world. You might yearn for a simple life in the countryside. Okay, yearn for something, yearn to do something. I yearn to travel the world, for example. Right? The yearning for human connection, all of it leapt into Edward's heart, suggesting basically suddenly, very quickly experienced real human emotions. They leapt into his heart when he received this email. To leap means to jump quickly, to jump a very large, quite a large distance. Leap, leapt. For example, a tiger leapt at the animal it was attacking. To leap into something as well. It could be literally, for example, a leopard leapt into the window of our car, which would be a very bad thing to happen, of course. But it could also be sort of more metaphorical as well. You might leap into a project, right? Meaning start doing the project with a lot of enthusiasm. Okay, so Edward knew that this message could be a scam, but he couldn't resist the temptation. A scam would be a trick to deceive someone, usually in order to steal their money, right? So there's so many scams in the world, like fake things which are basically tricks, deceptive things that probably are designed to get your money somehow. For example, we get a lot of email scams, right? You get an email asking you for personal information. They say, oh, congratulations, you've been selected to receive $64,479,733. It's always some like very specific, a very large amount. You've been randomly selected to receive this amount of money, as part of blah, blah, blah project. So please send us your name, your bank details, your phone number, your address. It's a scam, of course it is, as everyone knows. Or it could be another scam as well, that you get an email saying, please find enclosed the invoice for $568. Let us know if any information is missing. And there's an attachment which says invoice 0007 or something. But if you download the attachment, it's actually like it contains malware, some sort of software which is designed to steal all of the information from your computer or hack your computer in some way. So that's an email attachment scam, right? These are all kinds of scam, right? So Edward was aware that this message could be a scam, maybe from someone who just wants to steal his money or something, but he couldn't resist the temptation. He arrived at the bridge at the stroke of midnight, so at exactly midnight. When the clock strokes midnight, when the hand of the clock touches 12, that's when the clock strokes midnight, at the stroke of midnight. Okay? The imposing Big Ben looming out of the shadows. So Big Ben, of course, is this famous London landmark, the Tower of Westminster with the famous clock and the big bell inside that goes bong on the hour. The Big Ben is actually the name of the bell. The tower is the Tower of Westminster. It's also these days called the Elizabeth Tower, named after Queen Elizabeth II. It was given that name on the event of her Jubilee in 2012. So anyway, Big Ben loomed out of the shadows. To loom over, loom above, to loom out. If something looms, it's normally a large object or large thing which kind of appears in a threatening way, often over you or above you. For example, a building looms out of the shadows on the water. A huge ship loomed above us. So if you're in a little rowing boat out in the ocean and there's a huge container ship, the ship would loom over you or loom above you. Clouds loomed over us in the sky. It looked like it was going to rain. A huge monster loomed over us. The mountains loomed in the distance, okay? Meaning sort of appear in a large and slightly threatening way. The streets were deserted, meaning there was nobody there. The moon cast eerie shapes on the ground. Eerie shapes. Eerie just means strange, a bit scary, right? You know, like the way at night the moon casts its light. Well, actually the moon shines its light, and that light then can cast shadows on the ground, and those shadows can look a little bit eerie, strange or scary. Cast is like project, send out. Like the way we say broadcast. A radio signal is broadcast. And also podcast, because we cast this audio recording is cast over the internet to your iPod, although no one uses iPods anymore. But that's the origin of the word podcast. It's like an audio file originally, which is sent out through the internet. It's cast. So anyway, the moon cast, meaning the moon sent or projected these weird shapes, shadows on the ground, sort of giving a slightly scary atmosphere. As he waited, the tower's chimes resonated through the night. Chimes, this is the sound of the bell, right? The sound that the bell makes, dong, that's a chime. The chime resonated, meaning the sound carried through the air. Dong. Resonated means carried through the air. It rung, to ring out or to reverberate. Okay. Sounds can resonate, meaning that the sound carries or continues, but also things can resonate with you emotionally as well, meaning that they have an emotional impact. You feel the emotional resonance of something. For example, you might say, Luke, your story really resonated with me. I really felt similar to the main character. I was able to identify with him. So it really resonated with me, meaning I felt the emotion of the story. Okay. The tower's chimes resonated through the night, and he turned to see a woman emerging from the shadows. Emerging meaning coming out. Coming out of the shadows. Emerging from the shadows, again, slightly more literary language rather than saying a woman coming out of the shadows. Seraphina appeared to Edward like an enigma. An enigma is a mystery, a puzzle that you have to work out. Her features shrouded in darkness. Her features, this refers to like the shape or characteristics of her face or her body. So the way her face or body looks. These are her features. So you could just say that someone has strong features, someone has soft features. So the shape of the face, shape of the body. That's your features. Seraphina's features were shrouded in darkness. Shrouded, so it basically means hidden in the darkness. A shroud is like a long cloth, a long piece of fabric that might be wrapped around your body and wrapped around your head, protecting you. right? In this case, Serafina appears to be shrouded in darkness. So the darkness covers her body, seems to cover up her face. Is it the shadow? Maybe she's wearing a dark coat. Maybe she's wearing a hood. Maybe she's standing in the shadow of the tower or the trees. Edward can't clearly see what she looks like because her features are shrouded in darkness. She's a slightly mysterious figure. "You're Edward, the one who's been searching for answers," she said. Edward nodded. So to nod is to obviously move your head up and down to say yes. That's to nod. What's the opposite of nod if you're saying no? It's to shake your head from left to right. We call it shake your head, right? So the story would end pretty quickly if "You're Edward." "No, I'm not. No, sorry, I think you got the wrong person. Good night." And Edward went home, went to bed. That was the end of the story. Nope. Edward nodded. "Yes, I am." And he paused. "And you are?" "Call me Serafina. I've been watching you." Blah, blah, blah. As we move on to the next bit of vocab. Okay, Edward hesitated but found himself drawn to Serafina. He was drawn to her. If you're drawn to someone or drawn to something, it feels like you're moving towards them or you're being pulled in that direction. To draw someone to you is to like attract someone to you or pull them to you. He felt drawn. That's the passive form. He was drawn, or he felt or found himself drawn to Serafina. He found himself attracted to her. For once, things didn't seem so ordered and empty. There's that word, ordered again, meaning neatly organised and tidy. "Wait," said Edward, "one question. Are you real?" "Yes, I am," said Serafina resolutely. If you do something resolutely, it means you do it with firm determination, a strong feeling, a strong resolve. So she said yes, with strength, integrity, courage, self-assuredness. She's definitely telling the truth, and she means it. "Wait, are you real?" "Yes, I am real," said Serafina resolutely. She really means it. She said it with firm strength. Okay. "Well," Serafina replied, "you'll just have to take my word for it." "So how can I be sure that you're real?" he said. "Well, you'll just have to take my word for it, won't you?" So "you'll have to take my word for it." This is a fixed phrase. It just basically means you'll just have to believe what I say, even if there's no actual proof or evidence for it. You'll just have to take my word for it. I can't prove it with evidence, so you'll just have to take my word for it. You'll just have to believe what I say. Okay? Edward stood still, his mind turning. Okay, he glanced at Serafina. "Okay, I'll help," he said. So Serafina held a small, unassuming device in her hand. Unassuming? An unassuming device. This is a device is like some sort of little gadget of some kind, like some sort of piece of technology. It's an unassuming device. Unassuming means it doesn't really look very special. It doesn't look very fancy. It's kind of modest, humble looking, ordinary looking. It doesn't look like anything particularly special. "This is a disruptor," she says. So a disruptor, presumably something that disrupts things. To disrupt things means to interrupt or disturb things. Stop something from working normally. To stop a system or process or event from working normally. For example, the traffic was disrupted, meaning that the traffic was blocked or there was a traffic jam because of an accident. The accident disrupted the traffic. The government's website was disrupted by a hacker who wanted to cause problems as a protest. Right? So this disruptor, which disrupts things, somehow stops them or interrupts them, probably disrupts the simulation somehow. Conveniently, this is not explained in the story, but you just have to go along with it. Okay, that's a disruptor. To manipulate something, so this is a disruptor. It can manipulate the fabric of our world. To manipulate something means to control it. Right? Essentially, it can control the nature of our world. How? Just don't ask, Edwards, don't ask. Just go along with it. It can manipulate the fabric of our world. So the fabric of our world means the actual substance of our world. right? Now, fabric normally means material, like cotton is a kind of fabric, wool is a kind of fabric. Okay, it's a kind of woven material that's been made by weaving lots of threads together to create fabric. So the fabric of space, the fabric of time, the fabric of reality, the fabric of our world. This means these things are like a kind of material that's been made up of lots of strands woven together. The structure of our world, you could say. That's what the fabric of our world is. It's like the physical structure of our world. So this disruptor manipulates the fabric, the kind of structure of our world, okay, of the simulation. Okay. Serafina says, look, I need you to locate the core, the central computer that disrupts our world, that controls our world and disrupts it. I need you to locate the core, the central computer that controls our world and disrupt it with this. And she hands him the disruptor. Okay. Edward took one look into Serafina's eyes, her dark eyes, and felt himself hurtling through time. If you are hurtling, or to hurtle, it means to move at a very fast speed in a slightly uncontrolled way. Like imagine you're like flying the Millennium Falcon at top speed, but you're not very good at flying it, so it flies through space and whoa, it's hard to control. Hurtling through time, moving really fast in a slightly uncontrolled way. So he looked into her eyes and whoa, he felt himself flying through space and time. Presumably Serafina has got beautiful eyes, I would expect. He nodded resolutely. There's that word resolutely, with firm determination. He nodded. Okay. I'm not sure about this, Serafina, but you're so gorgeous that I'm going to say yes. Together they embarked on a journey. To embark on a journey, basically to start a journey, to set off on a journey. It's another example of some more literary language, right? It sounds quite impressive, quite descriptive. They embarked on a journey. They started a journey, basically, that would challenge everything Edward knew about his so-called reality. So this so-called, we use this adjective phrase to say that this is what people call it, but we don't really believe it. We want to question it. Okay. Other examples, you might say a so-called expert, right? People say he's an expert, but this so-called expert couldn't even answer basic questions about the subject. Or her so-called friends abandoned her when she needed them the most. So much for your so-called friends. In this case, challenged everything Edward knew about his so-called reality. They called it reality, but it wasn't even real. They visited hidden pockets of the city, hidden pockets of something, small isolated parts of the city, little parts of the city, isolated little areas of the city. That's hidden pockets. Little isolated areas that they didn't know existed, that they hadn't seen, that weren't really visible. Like, for example, doorways. A doorway is just a space where a door goes, right? A space in a building, a doorway. Doorways he'd passed without a second glance. If you pass something without a second glance, it means you don't really look at it carefully. You don't really check it very carefully. You don't think about it. You just pass it without a second glance. You might look at it once, but not even really consider looking at it again in more detail. For example, she'd always walked past him without a second glance, meaning she'd always walked past this guy without really even thinking that there was any reason to be interested in him. Similarly, they visited these places that Edward had passed previously without a second glance, places he didn't realise were special because he'd never really thought about looking at them very carefully. Dark corners where walls left gaps into vast undiscovered chambers. Gaps, just spaces. Empty spaces, right? So this is like gaps between walls. Edward had never really thought about these spaces before, but going into them, there you can see there are vast undiscovered chambers. Vast meaning huge, massive, enormous, gigantic. Undiscovered, nobody had ever discovered them before, right? And chambers are basically huge rooms, spaces, or caves maybe. So there are all these little undiscovered places in the city, doorways, gaps, holes that lead into much larger areas that Edward didn't know even existed. Shadows under trees which revealed themselves to be the mouths of unseen tunnels. So the mouth of a tunnel is the opening entrance to a tunnel. We call it the mouth of a tunnel. Here they met others who'd also seen through the reality of the simulation. To see through something is to see something as it really is. You see beyond the way something looks on the surface. You see through the surface view, and you see all the way in. You see what something really is like under the surface. So these people had seen through the simulation. They'd realised that there's more going on. The simulation was just a facade, like a fake reality. They'd managed to penetrate that and see the real nature of the world that they were living in. Over time, Edward and Serafina grew closer, so they became closer to each other. Edward's love for Serafina blossomed. Blossomed mean it developed, it grew like flowers on a tree. Blossom is basically flowers that grow on a tree in the springtime, right? When flowers are in bloom, they blossom, flowers growing. So his love blossomed, meaning his love developed like the way that flowers develop. His love blossomed amidst the chaos of their quest. Amidst meaning in the middle of, again a slightly more literary sounding word. Amidst the chaos of their quest. Chaos means total disorder, a situation where everything is completely confusing and disorganized, right? So you've got order, and the opposite of that is chaos, like disorder. So Edward's love for Serafina blossomed amidst the chaos of their quest, which is quite interesting, I suppose, sort of bit of character development, right? That initially Edward's life was very ordered, very safe, very, very structured, and free, apparently. But as he kind of uncovers the reality of his life, chaos comes into his world, but he also experiences human emotions and the danger of reality and the danger of love, which is that you might lose the one you love and the risks involved. So his love blossomed amidst the chaos of their quest meaning their mission. He felt a growing sense of purpose. A sense of purpose is like the reason why something is done. So a sense of purpose is the feeling that there is a reason or an objective for what you're doing, right? It's very important for people to have a sense of purpose, a sense that there's a reason for them to do the things that they're doing. Okay? So it gave Edward a kind of aim or objective in his life, which probably allowed him to feel real human emotions. It was a love forged in the belief that they were both fighting for the ultimate truth. To forge something is to make something from metal using a lot of heat. So a sword would be forged in a fire by a blacksmith, right? To make a very powerful sword, it's been forged by the best blacksmith. But also it can be used as a metaphor, right? So you can forge love, or friendship can be forged. For example, we forged a strong friendship while travelling together. It's often passive like this. It was a love forged in the belief that they were both fighting for the ultimate truth. It was a love which was forged. Our friendship was forged on the battlefield. Again, it sounds literary, impressive, dramatic. It was a love forged in the belief they were both fighting for the ultimate truth. But their journey was not without peril. Peril just means danger, a situation in which there's a lot of risk or threat of harm. Again, it's a slightly more impressive literary word. It's not necessarily the word I would use in my everyday life in conversation. For example, if I'm talking about the dangers of crossing the street, I wouldn't say, be careful because there's a bit of danger in crossing the street here. I would probably say danger. I wouldn't say beware of the peril of crossing the road in this fine city, But that's the language they're using in this story, or I'm using in this story, and ChatGPT used, because it's trying to construct a kind of fairly epic feeling in the story. So that it uses slightly more grand literary language. On their way, they encountered those who guarded the simulation. So this means they met people who guarded the simulation, right? Met people or met beings. I don't know if they were people. They were like simulated people, right? To encounter someone is to meet someone or to come across someone. You also encounter things. You can encounter an animal. For example, on our walk through the forest, we encountered a bear, a big, dangerous grizzly bear, right? We encountered a bear with its cubs. The bear saw us and attacked us and killed us, and now we're dead. How are you telling this story? Because we're in the afterlife. We're in heaven now. Didn't you realise? Oh, all right, okay. So you would encounter an animal. You wouldn't meet an animal. You meet a person. But also to encounter suggests that you just sort of like come across that person unintentionally, you just kind of your paths meet or something. But certainly you would encounter an animal, you wouldn't meet an animal. Hello, bear, nice to meet you. Hi there. You're going to rip my arm off. Okay. No, you would encounter a bear, not actually meet it. Anyway, they encountered those who guarded the simulation. Those, this is interesting, those here means those people, right? But this is slightly literary style. The word people has been elided, right? It's just been cut. Again, it creates a slightly literary style. For example, there are those who disapprove of all forms of gambling. And that line from Pulp Fiction, the Quentin Tarantino film, and I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. Which is that quote from the Bible that Samuel L. Jackson's character repeats several times in the film. Formidable adversaries or adversaries. Adversaries would be American English. Adversaries, British English. Formidable adversaries. Formidable means strong, big, powerful. They inspire fear, respect, awe, like a big, powerful warrior that you have to fight against. Oh, a big, formidable enemy. An adversary is someone that you have to fight against, or an opponent or enemy that you might have. It's not just used for battles. It could be for other situations where you're sort of against that person. For example, in a legal dispute, a sporting competition, right? Adversarial is the adjective. So sort of strong enemies or strong opponents, formidable adversaries, programmed to maintain the illusion of reality. So these are these enemies that the simulation has spawned in order to defend itself. Fierce battles ensued. So very aggressive, intense battles ensued, like started, happened, followed, happened as a result. Right? They came after. They met these adversaries, and then there were fierce battles. So fierce battles ensued, sometimes beyond the confines of normal life. So in areas sort of on the edge of reality, blending the lines. So here's the line between real life and the simulation, or real life and the real life and the illusion. And there's a line, but the line becomes blended. So it's sort of like confuses the distinction between reality and the simulation, blending the lines between digital hallucination. Now, this story doesn't actually explain how the simulation works. I don't understand how this would work, but I suppose it's some sort of system which essentially uses the brain's processing, something that accesses the neurological processes of the brain and introduces, and manipulates the neurological processes, flooding the brain with fake sensations or manufactured perceptions, essentially creating hallucinations, visual, auditory, maybe sensory hallucinations. That's maybe the state of the what it means to be in this simulation. That it's a kind of a digitally created hallucination that is activated through some sort of bio technology I don't understand. I mean, in the movie The Matrix, there's basically just a big USB plug in the back of your head. Click, and you just literally get connected to it like that. I don't know how it works, but anyway, digital hallucination, things that you see or hear or feel that are not actually there. So, all right, tangible reality is like reality that you can actually feel or touch. So essentially, this is where Edward and Serafina are battling with the agents of the simulation, and they're reaching the boundaries or limitations of the simulation, and the real world and the simulation are sort of like becoming a bit blurred together. One moonlit night, so night without the sun, night. That's what the night is, right? It's where there's no sun. Moonlit means that the light of the moon is illuminating everything. So a moonlit night, Edward and Serafina faced their most formidable adversary yet. Again, their strongest enemy yet. A towering figure, meaning very tall, large, like the Tower of Westminster, right? A towering figure cloaked in shimmering pixels. Cloaked meaning wrapped in some large material. A cloak, it's similar to the word shrouded, right? Shrouded, cloaked, kind of surrounded or wrapped in some sort of material. Shimmering pixels. Shimmering means shining and glittering, right? Pixels are individual little units of light which are used in computer displays. So this towering enemy is wrapped in shining, glittering pixels. So it's like a sort of it's made of computer graphics. Cloaked in pixels and black light. Black light is a kind of ultraviolet light which you can't actually see with your eye, but it does make things glow up. It's a kind of like deep ultraviolet light. So this describes this enemy, this big, it's sort of shining with glittering pixels, shimmering pixels and black light, ultraviolet light, barring their way. So basically standing in their way, blocking their way, barring their way. To bar, barred, right? To block someone from going somewhere, right? To be barred from entering a car, barred the road, to be barred from entering the competition. In this case, this towering figure was barring their way, preventing them from going any further. Edward activated the disruptor, this device that he had, this unassuming looking device. The world around them trembled, meaning it sort of like trembled, it shook slightly, like a little earthquake. And the Guardian faltered. So this enemy faltered, it hesitated, or maybe it stumbled, maybe lost its balance, it maybe fell slightly, or just stopped, it was disrupted. So maybe the Guardian was like when he activated the disruptor, the thing kind of went and maybe lost its balance. And this is when Serafina decides that she's going to do something badass. I think she probably gives it a big roundhouse kick. It says Serafina seized the moment, meaning she grabbed the moment, she took the moment, right? She took the opportunity. She seized the moment and struck a decisive blow, right? To strike a blow basically means she hit the Guardian. We don't know if she did it with her fist, with her foot, with a weapon. I'm imagining that she did some sort of super cool roundhouse kick, right? It's like, oh, the Guardian has faltered. Quick, now! And she did a great kick and a decisive blow, like a kick in this case that was like she took a instant decision, right, and quickly decided. A decisive blow, also a hit in this case that decided the fight, right? In fact, in this case, it finished the fight. Shattering the Guardian's code into fragments. Shattering meaning breaking into tiny little pieces, fragments. So she kicked him and he shattered into tiny pieces, tiny fragments. With the Guardian defeated, they pressed on, meaning they kept going, even though it was difficult. They kept going on a difficult journey. Beyond the city limits, following a faint signal. So faint meaning weak, like a weak signal from this disruptor. So the disruptor is kind of going beep, 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 and they're following this signal. This signal emanating from the disruptor in Edward's hand. So the signal is beep, it's emanating from it, it's coming from it. Right? Coming out of it. Coming out of the disruptor, emanating from the disruptor. It led them deep into the industrial wastelands. The wastelands. This is areas on the outskirts, the wastelands. This is areas where things used to happen, but they don't happen there anymore. In fact, now nothing is happening there, and there's just old things lying around. Everything's old and unused and damaged and wasted. The wastelands, the industrial wastelands, these would be the areas probably on the edge of the city that used to be used for industrial activity, like factories, warehouses, machinery, but now they are unused and probably all damaged and old. So these sort of like deserted wastelands, in this case industrial wastelands, on the far outskirts of the city. The outskirts are the areas on the edge of the city. It's different to the suburbs. The suburbs also is a word to describe areas on the edge or on the outside of the city. The suburbs are normally kind of residential areas around the outside of the city, which are often quite nice places where there are lots of homes, lots of people live there. There's a bit more space. You get parks, gardens, things like that. That's the suburbs. But the outskirts, also areas around the city, but all the way out on the very edge where the city ends and it's less populated, fewer people living there, and you might get these unpopulated areas like these sorts of industrial wastelands. So they ended up out in the industrial wastelands on the far outskirts of the city to a seemingly ordinary building. Seemingly ordinary. It seemed ordinary. Right? Inside they found an unassuming room. Here's that word, unassuming. Unassuming means it looks normal, doesn't look special, looks ordinary. No reason to believe it's special in any way. It's just an ordinary room with one single computer terminal. A single cursor blinked on the screen. So the cursor is that little icon that blinks on the screen on a computer, showing where you can type. Right, and you can move the cursor with your mouse or the trackpad or with the keyboard, right? The cursor, the thing that blinks on the screen, showing where you can write something. A single cursor blinked on the screen. Edward approached the terminal, his hands trembling with anticipation. Trembling, again, shaking slightly. In this case, he's kind of nervous, so his hands are trembling with anticipation. Anticipation is an expectation of what's going to come, that sense of getting ready for what's coming. So he's like, oh, what's going to happen? Is this it? Is this looks like it? As he connected the disruptor, I don't know by what, USB-C, I don't know what the connection was. As he connected the disruptor, the room seemed to ripple, revealing its true nature. So ripple means move in little waves, like the surface of water. So if you imagine a calm pond, and you take a little stone and throw the stone plop into the pond, the surface of the water will ripple and those ripples will come out. So the surface kind of moves in little waves. So suddenly the room rippled, which is quite strange. There's like waves in reality, or in this illusion of reality. Like blah, blah, blah. It was a control center. So suddenly it was revealed to what it really was, revealed to be what it really was. It was a control center, the hub of the simulation. So the hub means the central point where all things are connected together. We use hub for like electrical and software systems and stuff. For example, an internet hub would be a kind of router or connection point where all the computers are connected. All the computers are connected to this hub, and the hub is then connected to an internet like router. Okay, so that's all where all the computers are connected together in the hub. You can also have a transport hub, for example. This would be a place where lots of transport systems all meet each other. For example, at Heathrow Airport is a kind of transport hub because you've got all these different, these flight paths. So many planes land there. It's a place where planes land and then they go on to make connections in Europe or whatever. Also, you've got it's a transport hub because cars go there, trains all go there. Buses arrive at Heathrow. It's a transport hub. So in this case, the control center was the hub of the simulation. It was the central control center for the simulation where all branches of the simulation were connected or something like that. The screen displayed the message, blah, blah, blah. And then we end up with, so Edward chose to accept, he chose reality, and then the simulation began to unravel. Right, so if something unravels, it comes apart into different strands. So if you imagine a woolen sweater, like a jumper, a sweater that you might wear, made of wool, and if there's one loose little strand of wool at the bottom of the sweater, if you pull that, and you keep pulling it, the whole sweater will unravel. All the strands of the fabric will come apart. Okay. Similarly, if you've got some string and you wind it around your finger or wind it around your hand or something, and then you let it go, and all the string will unravel and it'll all come apart. In this case, the fabric of the simulation began to unravel. So the structure of it just started to fall to pieces. The cityscape dissolved. So dissolve. Normally we use dissolve when something solid sort of turns into lots of tiny particles and disappears. Like you might dissolve something in water. You can dissolve salt in water or dissolve an aspirin in water, right? In this case, the cityscape, that's the landscape of the city, dissolved. It just like disappeared into tiny particles. Okay, and Edward and Serafina found themselves standing in a vast, featureless void. Vast meaning huge, massive, enormous. Featureless meaning there are no features, completely blank. So they found themselves in a just totally blank, empty space. Edward looked at Serafina. That was too easy, he said. Suddenly the sound of a voice echoed around them. So echoed means the sound bounced and repeated, like a bit when you're in like a large room with empty walls and ceiling and you go, hello, 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 hello. That's to echo. I can create an echo effect actually here with this little mixing desk I've got. It's not the best echo effect ever, but it sounds like this. Hello, echo, hello, hello. Right, that's my echo effect. Okay, so suddenly the sound of a voice echoed around them. Okay, I'll turn that off now. Sound of a voice echoed around them. So it was kind of like, congratulations, lotions, like that. Okay. And it said, remember, reality is a complex tapestry. A tapestry is a kind of work of art made from many threads of material, often making a large picture, a bit like a big curtain or a carpet. That's a tapestry. Complex meaning very complicated. Reality is a complex tapestry. It's a thing that's made up of many other little strands. It's very, very complicated. The threads of your existence, so the individual strands of your existence, are intertwined, meaning they're all attached and wrapped up together like a tapestry is. intertwined, wrapped around each other and attached together, intertwined with the lives of countless others. So the threads of your existence are all intertwined with the lives of countless others. So basically all of your existence, your life, everything in your life is connected to so many other people, right? In real life, your existence is connected very closely to millions of other people. You don't live alone, but everything you do affects people around you. Edward previously lived a sort of convenient, isolated life in the simulation, but it's not like that in the real world. It's actually more complicated, and everything you do affects everybody else. So it's, there are emotional connections. There are all sorts of other forms of connection between you and everyone else. So be careful, is what this voice is saying. Who is this voice? I don't know. And why does this voice care? I don't really understand that part of it. Surely, what's the purpose of the simulation? It's to kind of keep people trapped inside it for some reason. And you'd imagine that it wouldn't be so easy to escape. But it seems that Edward and Serafina passed all these different tests and got to the point where, I don't know, the architect, like in the Matrix, the one who's designed the simulation, has decided, okay, you're well done, you've proven yourself worthy, you can live a free life, but you have to realise it's not easy, and you've got to make the right choices, you've got to make the right moral decisions, and you kind of say to yourself, wait a minute, who are you to give me lectures about living the right kind of life? You've created this weird simulation thing. Anyway, who knows? It's a story that takes place in a much wider universe that I haven't, that no one's actually defined. What am I talking about? I don't know. Right, keep going. Life in reality is neither simple nor easy. You must always choose, and choose wisely for yourself and for others. Okay. What's he talking about? Said Edward, turning to Serafina. But all of a sudden, Serafina seemed to slip away from him. To slip away means she sort of moved away from him gradually, as if she was standing on an icy hill, and she started sliding away from him. In the next few moments, Edward felt a profound sense of disorientation. Profound, like deep and strong. A sense of disorientation. Confusion, not knowing where you are, what direction you're in. If you're going up, down, left, right, you're lost and confused. Oh, where am I? What's going on? He felt a profound sense of disorientation as his memories and experiences shifted and merged with the things around him. Shifted, meaning that they moved, they changed position. They merged, they combined or mixed together, right? To merge is to combine, mix together. Have you heard of mergers and acquisitions in business? A merger is when two companies sort of mix and combine together to form one company, right? Okay, so it seems that Edward is coming out of the simulation, and everything's like mixing together, and it's all very disorientating as he enters reality. He saw glimpses of different lives, glimpses like quick looks, to catch a glimpse of something, to glimpse something, right? Quick moments where he quickly saw something, like quick visions of different lives, different choices, all part of the intricate tapestry of the simulation. There's that phrase, intricate tapestry again, very complex, woven tapestry. And then just as suddenly as it had begun, the void collapsed. So there's that word, the void again, an empty space. Edward and Serafina stood on a hill overlooking the city. If you're overlooking something, it means you're in a higher position where you can see the whole thing. For example, my apartment overlooks a railway station, or my balcony overlooks the park. The hill overlooks the city, okay, like Primrose Hill in London, which is a very nice place to visit. If you're in London and you want to have a nice, good, long walk up Primrose Hill, and from the top of the hill you get a really great view of the city. It overlooks the city. So they stood on a hill overlooking the city, bathed in the warm light of dawn. Bathed means covered in, covered in light. Bathe normally means to lie in water, like if you have a bath, you bathe, or to go in the sea, you can bathe in the sea, sort of to be in the water. But it also means to cover something in warm light. So the city was bathed in the light, the warm light of dawn. So there we go. There's that word again, dawn. And at the end of the day, dusk, right? So it's first thing in the morning. The sun is coming up. They're standing on a hill overlooking the city. The cityscape, that's the landscape of the city, was familiar, yet subtly different. Subtle. And in this case, the adverb subtly. Notice that the B is silent. It's not subtly, but just subtly. And not subtle, but subtle. So if something is subtle, it means with very slight details, little details, very nuanced. So the cityscape was familiar, yet subtly different. So different in ways which were not completely obvious, but little differences. They're like, this seems like the city, but wait a minute, some things are slightly different. It's subtly different. Serafina turned to Edward, a knowing smile on her lips. So a knowing smile, this is a smile which shows that the person knows something. In this case, she knows that they've done it. She knows that they have escaped the simulation or ended the simulation. Or ended the simulation. So she has a knowing smile on her lips. Welcome to the real world, Edward, she said. We made it. So we made it means we did it. We were successful. Right? It doesn't mean we constructed it. It doesn't mean that we constructed the real world. It means we managed to do it. Okay. We made it. Okay. So we managed to escape the simulation. That's what we made it means. So other examples would be like, we were successful. We managed to arrive somewhere. We're late, but we made it. It took a long time, but we made it in the end, meaning we managed to arrive. Okay. Or if you're you're traveling somewhere and you're going to be late, you might go, oh God, we're late. We'll never make it at this rate, meaning we're not going to get to our destination. Edward gazed at the transformed city. So he gazed at it. He looked at it with a look of wonder or amazement. Like, oh, wow. He gazed at the transformed city, a sense of awe and wonder filling his heart. Awe is a feeling when something is breathtaking, incredible, like when you're standing on the top of a mountain and you look out at a beautiful view of a valley below. Wow, a sense of awe. And you would say, wow, that's awesome, right? And wow, a sense of wonder, that's wonderful. So that's wonder, W-O-N-D-E-R. That makes you go, wow. The love he felt for Serafina was real, and the truth they had uncovered, meaning that they'd revealed, was the most exhilarating adventure of his life. So exhilarating means exciting and intense, like a very exciting roller coaster ride or something like that. As they embraced, so embraced means they held each other in their arms, like a hug, but it's a bit more passionate, and the word embraced is more sort of, again, more formal, more literary, more dramatic sounding. It sounds better to say they embraced in this point in the story rather than saying they hugged, because hug is what you might do to your grandma when you see her, when you go and visit her at Christmas or something, you hug her. But embraced sounds much more dramatic and profound. Okay, so as they embraced, the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden rays. There's that word cast again. Casting shadows, casting golden rays, broadcasting a radio program, podcasting. But the sun cast its golden rays of sunlight, golden rays of sunlight, upon a world that was now truly their own. You see, said Serafina. See what? Said Edward. I am real, she said. A smile arrived on Edward's face, and as Serafina smiled too, he kissed her lips, and she kissed him back. And that was when the explosions began. So there's that mysterious line at the end. I added that line at the end just because I wanted to add a sense of mystery at the end of the story. And I want you to decide what that actually means. Is that explosions of passion and love, or are they real explosions which are actually now going on in the real world, like I said before. All right, you know what? That's the end of the episode. We made it. We got to the end. Thank you very much for listening. Let me remind you, you can find all of those slides for this story on the page for this episode on my website. Just follow the link in the description. It'll take you there. You'll be able to download the PDF with those slides on it, and you'll be able to see my vocabulary notes. They'll be listed on the page as well. How was that for you, listeners? What did you think of that story? How did you, what do you think of the way that the story was written and what happened in it? Any thoughts? And what do you think? Are we living in a simulation? All of this stuff, is this real? Or is this some sort of trick of the mind? Is this an illusion? Maybe we are living in a simulation. You know what? I've read a few articles about this, and there are scientists who actually really believe that there's a very good chance that we're living in a simulation. I know it sounds crazy, but the theory is, I mean, it's a very complicated theory, but I'll try and sum it up in like a minute. The theory goes that in the future, right, with technology advancing at the rate that it is advancing, and it's advancing exponentially, where it's getting more and more and more sophisticated. For example, you just need to look at the way that AI is able to generate images and generate all sorts of things. It can generate audio, it can generate video, and it's getting better and better all the time. Imagine what AI will be able to create in 10 years' time in terms of immersive virtual reality worlds. Keep projecting that into the future with more and more development. Scientists who actually really know about this kind of stuff and philosophers have predicted that there will almost definitely come a point when our technology and artificial intelligence will be so sophisticated that we'll definitely be able to create some sort of technology or software that is a convincing simulation of reality. Now, I'm not entirely sure how that would work, but as I mentioned before, it would probably involve some sort of neural link, right? Some link between your brain and software, which is possible. That's already been done. It is possible to link those two things up together, but that's going to become more and more sophisticated. We will probably almost definitely get to a point where we'll have technology that will allow us to live in a very immersive, very realistic sort of virtual reality, but it will be so sophisticated that it will be pretty much impossible to tell the difference between a simulated world and the real world, right? So we are almost definitely going to reach a point when that is possible. And therefore, we then talk about a question of probability. So if that is an almost definite future where we have the capability to create simulated versions of reality, right? And then a number of them will be created, and it will be probably a large number of simulations will be created. We then get to a point where we decide, well, what's the probability that the experience that we're having now. So if you right, okay. So if you end up with this situation where there are many possible realities, and let's say even 99 of them are simulated realities, and one of them is real, the chances are we're living in one of the 99 simulated ones. That's something like that. That simulation theory is something along those lines. I think if I wanted to talk about this properly, I'd need to do a dedicated episode about it, but that might be an episode for another time. Are we living in a simulation? Let's explore the philosophy and the scientific theories behind it. But a lot of scientists and philosophers are saying that we probably live in a simulation. So there you go. Have a great weekend, everyone. And thanks for listening to Luke's English Podcast. I mean, if this is a simulation, right? If we are living in a simulation, why then is it so annoying? You know, like if it's a simulation, why couldn't the makers of this simulation make it a little bit easier? Why do we get headaches? Why, if we're living in a simulation, why do I bump my toe on the edge of my table in the morning when I get out of bed? Why do I bump my toe on the edge of the bed in the morning? Ow, 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 and then hop around like that. You know, why, if this is a simulation, why can I never find the toothpaste in the drawer? You know, why is it that I can only find odd socks in my sock drawer? Right? If someone's written a simulation, that means they've included those details. I know, in my simulation, Luke Thompson's never going to be able to find his socks. What annoying programmer included those details in this stupid simulation? That's what I want to know. Anyway, what do you think? Do we live in a simulation? Is this the real world or not? If you have created this simulation, let us know. Send an email saying sorry about the sock thing. What did you think of the story? I hope you enjoyed it. Did you learn some English from this? I'm sure you did. Go back through the story again and remind yourself of the vocab that's come up here. Leave your thoughts and comments in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave me a nice positive review if you feel like it. That would be very nice. But otherwise, I will speak to you next time. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And I will speak to you in the next episode. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. Bye. 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 Bye.